Boom. And we're live, I think. Let me double check YouTube. All right. It's actually up. We've done it.
Cool.
I was really curious how that. I've never actually done this from a hotel room, but as far as I can tell, everything seems good to go. And so with that, I will do a short little intro to what we'll be discussing today. If you clicked on this, you already know what it is, and that is a book discussion again on the book titled David Epstein. He's a journalist. He works currently for ProPublica. He's written other books, or this is the first or second book he's written. His first book was The Sports Gene, which was really widely popular, and I believe there's a TED Talk on it if you're curious. But as I said, this is a second book, and the subtitle of this book, which I think is incredibly fitting, but it explores why generalists succeed in a specialized world. And this is something that has been really near and dear to my heart as a topic ever since I saw, because I've always been enamored of being as general as possible within your range, because I think all of us tend to undercut, well, my job is X, all these other interests, and you say, well, they don't matter, right? They don't provide useful skills that I can pull into my professional life or whatever you call your career, right? The idea that your interests do matter and do count and do shape what you bring to the thing you get paid for, basically. And we'll just start with the title of the first chapter. Let you jump in, Joe, because I think this leads into that, because what people in the early 90s or so, everyone started getting into the 10,000 hour rule. And if you want to make the next Tiger Woods, or if you want to have the next genius in whatever, you want your child to start in that field. Typically, you see this as music. You start your child as early as possible so that they get their 10,000 hours done sooner than later. And all of the data shows that that is not a surefire way to succeed. And so this is The Cult of the Head Start is the name of that chapter.
Well, that's interesting, because I would have a surefire way to success. So that certainly doesn't seem unreasonable to me. I mean, the idea that just because you started early means you will succeed in the long run, I don't buy that. And I don't buy that because people have a certain amount of innate talent. They have a certain amount of interest in the thing. And if I don't have any interest in playing the violin, but you're making me play the violin when I'm young, then what makes you think that I'll succeed? I'll get some amount of talent out of this simple practice, but the lack of passion to me is a major obstacle. That is a major obstacle. So that's what I take away from that. I mean, obviously there's more to it than that, but that piece stuck to me.
So one of the core things about this is that in most of the research, or in the categories that people tend to effects, is within like chess and golf and music playing, right? And the reason this doesn't map very well into like other is that within those really structured games or sports, you have a very clear delineation of where the skill gaps are, where you can understand how to achieve a certain level of skill, right? And so one of the ideas here is called like learning environment. It's basically the difference in learning environment. Is it kind or is it wicked, as the author describes it? And so a wicked environment, some of your information is hidden, and whereas feedback is either isn't or maybe delayed and maybe infrequent, if not non-existent. So the wicked environment remains like it can reinforce wrong types you don't have all the information to you. And
So this
so
is your problem. So meaning that you're doing one thing or the other, and it's not actually clear to you what the right or wrong thing to do is
yes,
because you're not getting enough positive or even negative reinforcement on
yep,
any particular issue. That's really interesting to me because that plays out with with attachment styles. So you can have somebody who
hmm
has a disorganized attachment style, which is just about the worst you could possibly imagine. Which is that the rule, it's not just that you didn't get the attention you need from your parents and the comfort and the acknowledgement of your existence, or that you got too much of it and now suddenly you're kind of dependent or whatever it may be. Right? It's not just one or the other of these extremes. It's that there's and so it
yeah,
leaves this kid just lost as to what they're supposed to be doing. And you can imagine what kind of adult that produces. Somebody who's immensely self-conscious,
right,
wondering all the time whether or not what they're doing is the right thing, uh, desperate for solid ground, for a
yep.
foundation they can act from, which they
And
which
you
they
can
don't have.
and you can imagine too, right? Say you take this to the not the extreme, but you put a child into a highly structured sport like chess, for example, and they're decent at it. Maybe they're not genius level, right? They're not going to be rank one grandmaster, but you put them in that, and then you think that that is going to put your child up for success going forward. When in reality, much of the world, like much of what being successful in the world, means handling unknowns or known unknowns. Like you can do something, but you're not sure how things are going to play out. So you have to just pick a choice and go for it. Whereas when you're playing a structured rule set, you can be lulled into a sense of security of being like, well, I know how this. But when you pull that plug and you make them stop doing that thing because not everyone's going to make a career on these highly structured sports, you don't give them the proper requisite tools to be able to deal with these like patterns of recognition that in the real world you're just not always going to have either positive feedback or really any feedback. And it kind of goes on to like playing on some of the keyword ideas. One of them is, I'm sure you know this since you've done developmental psych, but he brings up the idea of chunking. Is like that's why people who do really well in chess, they can leverage the idea of chunking, because the difference between a amateur player and like a grandmaster player is they've seen so many different types of boards that they can do kind of like that high level extrapolation that like a supercomputer can do to see like, well, in this setup of pieces, here's like the possible make. And our brains can do those calculations just over time by just repetition, whereas like a or amateur person just doesn't have that working tool set. And so that's why when you start doing anything, you're basically creating that real life chunking set as whatever domain. If you start to play a video game at a high level, you start chunking different things about either map placements or like how enemies place themselves in a video game so that you can be more proficient than the enemy. Or if you're good, getting really good at school, like what do you do to study that works for you? You get really good at doing the things that help you to study better.
Right.
And
So
so it's like you can take these super simplistic.
is what's going on is that you're on a chessboard. And this chessboard, this person makes this move, and this move with this board is the way that it looks. There are 5 different potential ways to make a move right here. It's like, oh, I've seen this before. I recognize that this thing doesn't produce, in some sense, 5 different moves. It produces one move that breaks down in 5 different ways. So what chunking is taking in some sense, information and categorizing it into an easily unzippable package that you can analyze. So it decreases
Yeah.
the cognitive load that happens. So what you have in some sense in real life is with expertise is you're actually working way less hard because you've seen it all before. You've done this, you understand it, you've mastered it. You can predict where things go. You've played enough people that on average most people do this thing. But every so often you get a crazy person like this. But even the implicit information will tell you, yeah, he's not one of the crazy ones, and then and then you know where he's going, right? So you can
Yep.
play that game in an interesting way.
I think you're totally spot on. And I took a 10 So for everyone, I put this in the description, but I did do a really deep dive breakdown, or what I call blueprint, of this entire book, chapter by chapter. So feel free to go follow, jump into any chapter you like. We're probably not gonna cover everything in an hour here, but we'll get as much as we can get done. Into from this idea of chunking is in chess. So the author breaks this down as chess, or learning how to be good at chess, is a tactic level thing. So you know positions on a board and have a pretty good understanding of how, based on just how pieces are laid out, with that broader knowledge. Like if you have just a huge memory of all the pieces available to you, then you can be really good at it. But the problem with chess is that, or problem with looking at things at only a tactical level, is you don't understand like the overarching goal, which if you zoom out, what is it? It's tactics is like the low level stuff, strategy is the high level stuff. And so what humans are really good at is strategy, thinking big picture, being able to look at everything going on and being able to adapt to the current tactic you are using. As someone from the military, you'll respect this a lot. And so one of the cool things that we've been seeing within like the AI development of like chess games or gaming with AI is there's a offshoot of, instead of just using only AIs that play against humans to win, that's pretty easy. But what they've been starting to do is they have human AI working together against each other. So you combine the best of both worlds. You get the tactics from the computer because the computer can run the simulations, but then you have the humans picking how to like execute on that strategy, like the overarching strategy to win more effectively. And I think that is where the magic of all the stuff is, right? Like about AI taking over, but I think the magic is leveraging the AI so humans can execute more effectively.
Yeah, I have thought about this because it has bothered me like crazy. So we can, as is typical of our live streams at this point, go off on a tangent inspired by the particulars of the thing that we're reading. And the inspiration here is coming from talking about AI tech. And the thing that's really scared me about AI is something that I learned from biology. So in evolution, what you have is you have a species, and the species is migrating a little north, and that's where the food is. And one half goes to the right side of this mountain range, and the other half goes to the left side of this mountain range. Well, they go in those different places, and the environments are slightly different, and they're separated by this range, so they won't see each other for long enough time that, well, the range separates them, meaning that they can't have sex with
Interact.
each other. They can't interact. They can't reproduce with each other. So the genes stop mixing, right? So on one side you have one gene pool, and the other side you have another gene pool, and they only mix with each other, and they don't mix. They don't cross pollinate. And then over a sufficient amount of time, they start to deviate in the direction of the environment that they're in, and that's called speciation, which is the creation of a new species. But it's not just the creation of a new species, it's the differentiation of an old species into, in some sense, two new species. Now, it doesn't have to go to one that continues forward to one that deviates off, or they both go in totally different directions, or whatever, right? But let's say they are reintroduced into an area. So you have right side of mountain and left side of mountain, and now they're so differentiated that if they tried to reproduce, they couldn't, right? But now they both are relying on the same resources, but they can't reproduce. So there's no means of unifying these groups at a fundamental level, but they do need the same resources. So all that's left for them is competition. And so they duke it out. And you don't even need to go so far that you can't reproduce. Human beings were in competition with Neanderthals, and we could reproduce.
Yeah, right.
With them, and we still killed all of them. So you don't even have to go that far.
Yeah.
So what I see with AI is this potential for us to go, oh, let's create a new species that's significantly different from us. I mean, how do you reproduce with AI? That's a confusing thing. where we will be inevitably in competition with these things, and we will die.
Yeah.
The networks, not the networks, the wiring, the simple wiring that AI operate on compared to what we operate on, which are neurons and axons, and this is 1,000 times faster. Okay, 1,000
That's
times faster.
insane. I didn't realize how fast
That
it
means
was.
that if we can make a functionally equivalent artificial intelligence, right, in that it has all the same systems, whatever, but the only difference, as if that would be the only one, the only difference is the speed at which it can transfer information exists, then for every year that we spend on a problem, it spends 1,000. Okay,
It's just a
so
multiplication factor.
compete with that thing, because if the competition we're in comes to blows, and we have 1 year to come up with a strategy to kill all the AI, they have had 1,000 years to think about how to kill us, and we lose every single time. That this is an argument that Sam Harris has made. This is not even that complicated, right? The fact of this argument's simplicity is part of what gives it its weight. It's, oh man, that follows. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, and this is why I personally think that instead of aiming to do something where an AI is like semi-sentient, or, general intelligence, right? AGI is one of the buzzwords in this. I don't personally think that is as interesting or important to do, because my thinking is that machines and systems should always be created in service of helping humanity do what they're good at, not.
Yes.
And that means
nailed the alternative.
Yes.
Exactly what I wanted to get to, and exactly what this thing was. The book was inspiring in me to express, which is that the alternative is what I call encephalization. So,
okay.
1.5 million years ago, for reasons that are kind of up in debate, some people say what they call mimetic driving, which is the idea that our memes which are simple ideas, bits of information ideas. Everybody knows the word meme from the internet, but that word meme, and the idea of a meme on Facebook, is the consequence of Dawkins in '74 talking about a meme being an analog to a gene, but in culture. So you have the building blocks of culture, simple ideas that can interact with each other and evolve, right? And a meme can evolve at such a rate and to such a degree that it ends up directing the genes of a person or the species, the lineage, right? So now the ideas start to select for the people. They start to determine who gets to live and die and how they operate in some weird way. And this is evident in things like so this is considered one of the reasons why our cortex might have expanded, is that our ideas in some sense started to select for hardware that could house and proliferate our ideas, and that's the neocortex, right? So
wow.
there's one idea. Another idea is more simply, I started with the most complicated one first, but
Naturally.
the other ideas are things like nutrition. So Richard Wrangham talked about, now this is a meme, fire, and that the idea that you could cook decreases the amount of energy you have to put into chewing and digesting and this.
Externalized digestion.
Right. So all that energy can be kind of pushed up into the brain and used for something else, which none of these are mutually exclusive. You could have the meme of cooking, right? So meme is a mimicable thing. That's how it transfers from one person to another. My suspicion is that what we did when we were very, very old. I mean, when writing didn't exist. This is world history. This is 70 plus thousand years ago. Actually, probably more. Was that we saw wildfires. So there are Aborigines in Australia who still do this. They see wildfires, bang, it goes through. They mimic nature. They may even personify nature, that you have Mother Nature, and now that she's a human, you can learn from her in the same way you learn from humans, mimic her in the same way that you mimic.
Gotcha.
She sets fires to cook animals. I can set a fire to cook an animal as if she's a role model, teaching you that you can do this thing. You have that as an idea. It's a functional idea. Other people mimic that idea. And then that thing, because the idea is a functional idea, meaning that it increases the likelihood of your survival and perpetuation, it proliferates very fast through a culture, but it also gets settled into the biology. So because it's useful, because it has impact on your biology, it affects how you digest and so on. It is so constant over so long a time. Like the idea that we can cook is constant for so long that the cookedness of our food becomes a reliable feature of our environment, such that we adapt to it to the same degree we would adapt to the weather or any other consistent thing. And so today, because an idea occurred way back 100,000 years ago, if I eat raw food, I'll be sick.
Right.
So the ideas plus the functionality of those ideas are altering my DNA, right? But that produced, hypothetically, the massive explosion of our neocortex about 1.5 million years ago. Just wow, this thing evolved fast. And suddenly, ideas, we can play with these things, we can do all this interesting stuff. What I would like to see from AI is not the splitting off of some new species that we're now in competition with because we're doomed if we do that. But instead, our AI become a new neocortex, that it's the next part of our brain stacked on top.
It's a symbiotic relationship.
Yes.
Is what I would aim for.
Means of expanding ourselves, not replacing ourselves.
Yep.
Which would be a very bad idea.
So, to what you were just saying, one of the last points that I highlight in the chapter 1, that is the idea of cognitive entrenchment. I'm not sure if you've heard of this before, but I think it's kind of rampant right now. I'm sure, as I said, that whoever's listening has many ideas of different ways someone may be entrenched. And at a high level, it's an active and experienced group becoming rigid under pressure and regressing to what they know best. And I'm sure, again, you can find many examples of this throughout science and different industries where people panic when under any sort of external pressure or deadlines or whatever it is, instead of doing the thing that is innovative or what they stop and panic and they go back and huddle, right? They turtle. And the point being is that majority of us should not do that, especially if you're looking to grow and improve your range so that you don't stagnate, right? And like, again, if we're thinking about this in the AI sense, right? The AI can rapidly iterate, and what does like reproducing as an AI look like? Currently, in the coding world, what you do is called forking code. So if today there's already a group of code, you just take that code and you fork it, which means you copy everything, but you don't change anything from the original code base.
So this sounds like cloning, not like reproduction.
But then a clone you can edit it however you feel like without destroying the original.
Okay.
So it's a
That would be the
descendant technically.
right.
Yes.
So if what cloning is a copy without variation, where reproduction is
Yeah.
a copy with variation, then our manual varying of the copy is what makes it a reproduction instead of a clone.
Yes.
Cool.
And so there's some cool quotes here from different professors that I thought was worth commenting on. Eric Dane from Rice University recommends varied challenges within a domain. And another researcher working with him said having one foot outside of your world. And to continue on to Spanish Nobel laureate Santiago Ramon y Cajal, to him who observes them from afar, scattering and dissipating their energies, while in reality they are challenging and them. And to put it another way, from Christopher Connolly, early in their careers, those who later made successful transitions had broader training and kept multiple career streams open, even as they pursued a primary specialty. They traveled rather than a single lane, one-way street. So the point being, you can put your efforts in like a whole bunch of different baskets while having one main track that you're kind of going on. But as long as you keep those interests burning, right? It's like having a whole bunch of little fires kind of kindling. And you do that long enough, at some point, one of those fires might find something and, finds just enough kindling and poof, it blows up a little bit and you get another insight that you can either pull back into, or maybe it turns into your new thing to explore that could be tangentially related in your main domain somehow, right? Like if you're creative enough, these in, and kind of going back to the AI thing, the AI is not going to be able to do this level of creative thinking where you can have all these different things running in parallel that you can only your unique interests in like a melting pot sort of way can pull from, right? Like for the majority, at least for me, it's like in a daily way, I can talk about technology, nutrition, exercise science, AI, high level engineering, problem solving, and all these things, right? And it sounds like a lot of these things are totally widely separated, but you can pull all of them together through a through line of decision making frameworks and setting yourself up with creative plans so that you can make them bite sized in a way that all of a sudden it's like, wow, hold on, wait, you can think about these one type of framework rather than like, well, they're all widely spread out that don't make any sense whatsoever.
This is so my disposition. Like it like I would. So I was in a philosophy class, Michigan. This is a political philosophy class. We were actually talking about Marx,
Mm-hmm.
and I kind of thought like I forget what the whole the sway of the debate was, but at a certain point I thought like Marx is the most capitalist of all of them. And it isn't because he likes capitalism, it's because he can't see reality outside of it. That it's like he spent all of his time thinking economically about capital and labor and all these things, to the point where he specialized so narrowly that the obvious things about reality that are not governed by markets or shouldn't be looked at in a market fashion are. And so for Marx, there's no nature, there's no biology, there's no intrinsic value to a human being outside of their labor. Like there's
Right.
all these weird things that just don't exist that seem self-evident or obvious to any normal person. It's like,
Right.
yeah,
Like he thinks GDP is ultimate outcome of a person, right? Gross domestic product.
yeah, and it's strange, as if like I don't even know, like me go what use if I went to a funeral like for someone that I loved and I was even the only person there, so I didn't get any benefit from like politically in some sense from being there.
Right.
What is the value to that? What labor was put into that? What is this other than the chance for me to grieve? And that might be, you might think of grieving as cynically, as me gaining some value from that opportunity to grieve, as if I'm making a trade, right? That I'm trading
Yeah.
my labor for reprieve from sadness or something. And okay, I'm not actually totally in disagreement with that. But what if but there's a simultaneous feeling of respecting that person, right? I can think of funerals I've been to where there's this, where I'm not there just because I'm miserable and sad, but I'm there because they deserve for me to be there.
Right.
And what do you mean labor? What am I benefiting from this? Right? This isn't about me at a certain point anymore. This is about the fact that that person who's gone deserves for me to be there and show my respect for them.
Yeah.
And I just don't see any of that in Marx. And I wonder if I don't see any of that in Marx because Marx, he just didn't have a life. This
Right. I
guy
mean,
was fixated on this problem. I mean, he didn't even know how to fucking handle money. Engels was the one that was funding it. I edited half of his fucking books. This dude was just a rich kid who couldn't make it on his fucking own, and they got bitter about it, and now we have to deal with his goddamn problems.
sounds like certain contemporary problems, but digress there. I mean, to me, the reason I find this book so like necessary is that I feel that majority of people, in our age group or in general, is that we're squashed, right? We start out as these three-dimensional children, right? And we have all these interests and all these things that we want to do and explore, but then all of a sudden we are told, like, nope, you got to sit, do your homework, do all the things, check all the boxes, and then as soon as you try to be interested in other areas, you're told, you get either laughed at by your peers, ridiculed in some way because you're a nerd or you're whatever, right? Like as soon as you show any sort of motivation to be outside of the laser lock focus, you look like an outsider, and it's like, why? That doesn't make any sense. And then the other part of this is that once we hit a certain age, early 20s, post college, that kind of thing, there's like this assumption that people are supposed to have their life, like you're supposed to just be locked in, and like this is your 9 to 5 is going to be X, Y, or Z, and that's all you're ever going to be. So might as well stay in your lane, keep your nose to the grindstone, and that kind of bullshit. And I just don't think it's true. Especially in the 21st century, I just don't see that being possible, because at the end of the day, this is later on in the chapter, but what it takes to be exceptional, right? To be cutting edge in something, anything, it takes you just, Joe, you know this, but if you try to take a PhD, it takes you 25 years roughly to get all the way there. And by the time you get to that cutting edge, you're 35, 40 years old. And this is not to detract you. I'm just saying this is just not feasible for the vast majority of people. And so what is the fast track to do this? Well, in my opinion, it's taking all the things that you're interested in, combining them in a unique and only unique way, right? You become an N of one, because you're the only person that could talk about these subjects in the way that you can. And so you do that. You start just making sense of it, however you see fit. And all of a sudden, that's going to open up new doorways, because then the subject matter experts can look at your ideas and be like, wait a minute, they might be onto something. And then they can apply all their super cutting edge, high end science and push the domain forward that might not be, like, because they're so entrenched in their niche, right? Like if you imagine this as like the Marianas Trench of something, right? Like you have all these little canyons, but then you have the experts that goes all the way down to the bottom, because they're so deep, they're not even looking above. So then all it takes is someone to do something unique and be like, wait a minute, I think we're looking the wrong way. And there's examples in this book of things like that solve problems that these subject matter experts overlook because they're like, well, that doesn't pertain to my field.
Yeah, I Yes, and they don't know how to incorporate it in some sense in their field either. This is a very weird thing when you talk about like lateral things.
Yes.
Somebody who's a specialist in their individual field,
There
and
is
you talk
literally a chapter called lateral thinking in this book.
as opposed to linear thinking. And
Yes.
linear thinking is very good for specializing. It's very good for moving what's already going has momentum forward, right? But it is not very, very bad at changing direction. And lateral thinking has so that is linear thinking at its extreme, where everything pushes forward in the wrong direction, collapses in on itself, and breaks. The extreme of lateral thinking is that everything spins off in a different direction. Nothing is connected to anything, and you trip into schizophrenia, forced to make connections using this phantasmal imagination to generate some coherence, right? So you can
Mm-hmm.
go totally off the fucking rails, all over the place with lateral thinking, or you can go psychotic megalomania fixatedness on a single issue in linear thinking. You need a marriage between the two. You
Right.
need to be able to push in a general direction, to understand you're moving, you're oriented that way, but be flexible, be able to move around obstacles, to flow around things that are in your path, that you need to be like a river, like a stream going downhill, that you know that you're going to settle into the basin. But
Mm-hmm.
how exactly you'll get to the basin will be determined in part by the obstacles that are in your way at any given moment. There's this concept of Wu Wei in China. I think it's a Taoist idea, which is
Probably.
translated as something like inaction or non-action, but it's not a perfect translation because we would as not doing anything, as sort of sitting there and being subject to the whims of nature. But Wu Wei is not that. It's more like active inaction. The idea
Mm.
is that you're in the present moment and things are occurring, and those things are outside of your control.
Yeah.
You accept those things as being as they are. You don't fight reality. You don't say, you don't deny anything. You don't say that it should be another way. There's a tree in my path. It shouldn't
Yeah.
be there. That is not how you react. You say, I am moving in this direction. There's a tree between me and where I'm heading. I accept that fact and I'll move around it. Right? It's a radical form of acceptance without submission to reality. That it's I am, nature is, nature will do as she wills. I will do as I will in response to nature without resentment and
Yeah.
flow around everything that I experience. That's Wu Wei.
I like it.
And that seems to me to be appropriate balance between this linear and lateral thinking.
Yeah. So give you an example or concretize some of this stuff from the chapter. So if anyone's interested in the book, this is chapter 9. The actual title is Lateral Thinking with Withered Technology. And this idea actually comes from one of the original engineers for what would become the game company Nintendo. And so this is for me, this kind of like pushes all the buttons as someone who just loves everything about technology and gaming and people being innovative in a way that you would never expect. And so I'm just going to read a little bit. I'm going to probably butcher his name because he's Japanese, but I'll do my best. But In 1965, Nintendo hired Gunpei Yoko. Yoko was a wide-ranging hobbyist, one of which is called a monozukuri, which means, or which translates to thing making. It has a name in Japanese, which is amazing to me. And one day, the president saw him playing with one of his inventions that became the company's first toy, the Ultra Hand. And if you go to the page on Feeding Curiosity, you can find links to this to see what this looks like. And afterward, the failure built this creative philosophy, and which created the drive game, and that was advanced for his time, but it was fragile and complicated and expensive. Yokio recognized he was not a highly skilled engineer. He had no desire or skill to compete with the cutting edge electronics at the time, and that's when he began thinking about lateral thinking with withered technology. And going further, I'm skipping ahead a little bit. As an example, one of the favorite examples from Yoko is the Game Boy. By the standards of the time, the Game Boy was laughable, but not being on the cutting edge meant it was developers and then by customers by extension. He said, how can we apply this philosophy more broadly? I'm going to back up, skipped, but the idea here is that first, don't think of technology in a sense that we usually do as objects that we use, but relatively mature ideas, so they're accessible to the broadest number of people. Though we don't see it this way, books are a technology and podcasts are a technology. Lateral thinking about what technology people are overlooking. As an example of innovation, young people see things differently than their teachers, managers, and parents. Our vantage point is different because we are immersed in a different pool of ideas and technology. The idea is to look at others that seem to discount and what it takes little effort to apply to your peer group. So the point in AI is that you can look at something that people are like, well, that's just a toy, it's garbage, throw it away, right? What they did with the Game Boy is they combined a whole bunch of things that were mature at the time, so they were cheap to produce, they were comfortable with current developers to work with and make games fast, and it was easy enough for a mobile. So I summarize this, but at the time in Japan, a lot of people used the subway to travel to and from work. And before this, they had the Game & Watch. And so part of what made Game & Watch important was that it combined a watch. So business people were like, well, it's functional, so I can still use it, but it had the game built into it. So it kind of seeded this idea that you can still play games and be an adult at the same time. Fast forward to the Game Boy, which then explodes for someone like us in the 90s, basically played Game Boy as one of our first game systems, even though at the time it was a laughable screen, it had no color, it had like no memory, and it was not really like all that good. It was like 16-bit, if that. I don't even remember what the screen was, but you basically had this perfect storm of technology being repurposed in a way that made it accessible, and it didn't ask a lot from the audience base, from both a development standpoint, to be able to buy into it. And I think we're so much on that other end of the thinking spectrum of like, well, what's the cutting edge? What's like the next big thing? When I think in reality, this phone in our hands is literally a computer. And so the question is, what can we do with it now that we are overlooking because of how much excess computing power we on it with some creative thinking? Because it's already, how can we leverage it in a way that's not, the technology you can ask more of it?
Yeah, yes, absolutely. And it's like, if I can it's almost like I need to add another, I'm not sure how different this is, but another constraint, which is that it's like, okay, you have this piece of technology, as you're saying, that it has a whole bunch of functionality, but it asks a lot from you, right? With these notifications, with its obnoxious, incessant poking at your attention, which is in the benefit of course, of Facebook and Instagram and all these fucking places, who I have a whole problem with. But additionally, it needs to be like an extension. The question is not what are human propensities that we can extort for profit. That's wrong. That's speciation. That's the beginning of speciation, the competition between us and the digital world. The question is, how can we leverage these things to expand our ability for connection? So what I would really like to see, for example, is dating apps not looking at how to draw attention from people, but rather how look at the data. What creates a long-lasting marriage? What is it that predicts this? Can we incorporate that into this dating app? This is what I would like to see. And is it going to, like, as a business person, how is it that you might actually be able to have a app like this and make a profit? Well, one, you can just raise the price. You think that people won't pay a fuck ton to find the one?
Yeah, I mean, I think you're absolutely right. I mean, in like the early, probably like late 2010-ish, right, when all these app things kind of started becoming big, the idea of like, well, it's a free service, right? Like this, at no cost to sign up. I think that was a good idea when you had startups blowing up to show that, look, we have this giant community. In reality, a community does not mean a large number of people on your platform. Is a better metric is something along the lines of like activity. And I mean, personally, Discord, something like a Discord is way more beneficial as a part of like proving an actual use case to how to drive personal connection, because it makes the friction, right? And Discord is kind of unique in the sense that it was a gaming thing initially, but now it's expanding more broadly into other domains because of just how good it is at what it does. And so I think instead of looking at these things as like, oh, well, we need to just get always free access, I think some of this, like having an exclusive quote unquote walled garden that you can curate people that are in it or have better like grouping people with like your interests, right? Can you kind of pulling this back to the dating app world, like can you imagine where you have like a dating that you fill out like some sort of questionnaire or some sort of thing it learns, maybe it connects to the social media you already have, or maybe it logs in, like you give it access to look at your like Netflix profile or something like that, where it learns something about you that's tangible that says, hey, it seems like you're X kind of person, right? You kind of can leverage the personal data set that you already exists as who you are on the internet in some way. And then it's like, well, here's this whole group of people that seem like they might like the same things you do. Because having shared deep interests is really important for long-term healthy relationships, both significant and just friends, right? Like we all know that intuitively.
This is one of these things you can totally expand on it. So it's like, okay, you put in a whole bunch of interests. Long day.
I get
Based on either your search, this would scare me a little bit, but your search tendencies or so on. But you can have them take a Big Five personality test. You can have them take tests that gauge their attachment style.
Mm.
On a whole cacophony of different psychological tests, see the degree of effect that they have, play out with them, look for best matches, and find a pool in 100-mile area.
Yep.
Where it works. It's like, okay, this is doable.
Right. Because part of it to me, like when I think about this like an engineer, I've thought about this lately, especially it's what are the incentives, right? Because if you look at these platforms, their incentive to actually match people effectively for long-term healthy relationships is actually almost zero. Because what they you do is you find a whole bunch of partners as often as possible, and then you come back for your next dopamine hit.
Yes.
And so because that is the incentive their platform does, because if it's free, that means they're effectively, as it's more and more effective, their bottom line goes like this, because their possible growth trajectory is only down unless they can get more and more people onto their platform.
this free game is a fucking bad strategy for humanity. It is a bad
Because things
strategy.
aren't free. I'm sorry.
You can have Tinder to be free for people that want to bang. And if all they want to do is have cheap sex, fine. But you need a separate balancing act here
Yeah.
that's designed for people that want to be in a long-term relationship, that want to find someone to settle down with, right? This is a natural human inclination, right? That is as real as any sexual desire, if not more real, in that it allows for the generations of people who have sexual desires to emerge, right? It's in some sense, sexual desire is predicated on the perpetuation of a species that has sexual desire, and the thing that's perpetuating the sexual desire is literally having kids. So how about
Right.
like settle down and allow people to do that?
Actually do that. Actually do what the technology was supposed to help us do, right?
I don't even.
Yeah, right.
I think that
I
people.
mean,
This is evident in Facebook. Is that these motherfuckers just read the addiction literature? They didn't give a shit about human connection. What they gave a shit about was just bleeding you through your eyes of all your attention, so that they can just drip it into a syringe to give to advertising companies. Just give me a fucking another hit of their attention. These sick fucks. I fucking Facebook.
I know. I mean, honestly, I think we've brought up social media enough. I think we should honestly do a future podcast on the social dilemma, broadly speaking, and just kind of highlight some of that stuff, because I think it's worth reiterating or readdressing, just given that some of this kind of seemed to be pushed to a back burner since the pandemic and things like that. So I think it's worth, bringing back front and center, because of just, I personally don't think Meta is a good idea, or having Facebook control something like the metaverse, I should
It's
say.
a nightmare. You think these people are going to handle that responsibly? Get the fuck out. They can't handle anything.
Right. And I think so, kind of rolling this in a positive pivot, like what you could call this, some of this stuff is like gamification of apps and technology. So things that make you want to do more of it, right? And you see this rampant in video games, how like video games as a service are designed, basically doing daily rewards or daily activities so that you're like, because I gotta get my next little bump, right? It's the same little triggers that drug addicts do or alcoholics do. It's that, but just like just under the radar a little bit more, right? It's not as insidious.
How fucking sick do you have to be as a human being to go and try to figure out, like, if you've ever seen someone who is addicted, like I have, to heroin, right? And how horrible that is, and what that turns them into, how unbelievably destructive that is in their life. And you go, how can I recapitulate that? How can I try that again? How many people can I turn into heroin addicts? And they did that. Facebook read the addiction literature and thought, that seems like a good idea. Maybe we should get people addicted. And then they wonder, I'm sure they don't, because they're emotionless freaks, wonder, what are the consequences for human beings? How shocked we are that people are acting like heroin addicts, that they're behaving in crazy and neurotic ways. Yeah, no shit, you sick son of a bitch. Fuck.
We're doing science experiments on population level people, populations that didn't choose to be a part of these experiments, right? And to kind of push this in the direction of like, okay, so how do we change, right? Like, instead of just pointing out negatives and not giving any concrete examples of what a good thing looks like, I'm going to use Duolingo, the language learning app, as a positive aspect of how to do things right. And so if you read this book and you look at an app like Duolingo, and I should probably do like a separate talk on this because I think it captures a lot of the learning literature, like within psychology of learning, and also within like that first chapter with the wicked versus uh, nice learning environments. You realize structure things such that it gives you all of the proper feedback without the addictive qualities. And so what you can do with like Duolingo, it does a whole bunch of things right. Now they have like these daily challenges, and so it's like spend 10 minutes learning a day, or earn 20 experience, which is like 2 lessons. So depending on how fast you are, you can do that in 5 minutes, if less, if not less, if you're just on top of it or doing an easy lesson. Or you can do like a legendary exercise, which is like a harder, where you have to memorize the actual words and stuff. But all of this, again, what does it mean? You're spending more time in the app, but what is the goal? To learn a language. It's all in service to learn the language. Also, by the way, what they have now is, so say language for a long period of time. What it's doing as you get things wrong, not only at the very end of your lesson do you revisit the ones you got wrong, if you also can go back like the next day and just do a section of the only things you got wrong, so you can go back and do what's called active error correction, which is, this is one of the things that they talk about in learning literature. So like in musicians, what you can see when people are getting really good at something, or when they're like kind of hitting that like neurological sweet spot of skill building, is you do active error correction. So you're practicing a new song, as soon as you hit an error, you stop, redo it until you get that error right. And you do this like recursion basically, where you just keep going back and forth to the error. And what this is doing is, this is helping in your brain. This is not from range, but this is from the talent code. This is basically improving your myelin sheets, which you can think of as insulators on your neurons, so that over time you're making sure those neural connections are basically not losing anything over time. And so part of reading both of these books, you basically have this idea that being talented or being skilled at something isn't just being like, well, I just get this stuff. No, what it actually is being able to recognize feedback, and also not being so turned off by having like getting things wrong, right? Like in school, most of us are trained, well, you have to be a straight A student and you have to be perfect. No, I think that's the exact wrong thing you should be teaching people to do. What you should be teaching the people to do is, when they get, you don't say, oh, I guess you're not cut out for this, you're not good at math, or you're not good at whatever. Instead, what you should be doing is be like, okay, let's just, you did this section really, really well, but let's look like these 4 problems that you got wrong, and I'm going to help ask me questions like, what would you think you should do here? And then I'm going to guide you through and to help you understand why your thinking in this specific example was wrong, right? Like for me, I'm learning German. I've spent like almost 3 years doing German now, because part of it for me is I want to suck at something every day. And so one of that, using skill building within a language, so that my brain isn't getting so comfortable that I'm just like, well, I'm just kicking ass in every domain I'm in, because I can go and Duolingo right now and find a lesson I'm going to suck at. And the point being is that you're basically training yourself to be able to take on problems that you're not, like, you're just at the edge of your comfort zone, but like not quite. So you get like 70% right, and that's like the sweet spot where, so you're, and the point is being comfortable right at your edge of skill.
Yeah,
and you do that long enough, and your skill goes, you just keep pushing that forward, right? Until you're 50 and you're at the top of the mountain, or well, the mountain just gets bigger.
That is there's this thing, there's a psychologist, Vygotsky, one of the Russians. This idea of the zone of proximal development, which is a Goldilocks zone. So you have some amount of information that you know, and then you have some amount of information that you don't know. And if the new, or this information that's incoming to you, is too close to what you know, it's boring. It might be new, but it's boring, and who cares? If it's too far outside of what you know, then it's exhausting. In fact, you don't even know how to get your hands around it. It's just like, what the shit am I looking at? But there's this golden thing, this little intermediary place around that that you can find yourself in, where it's more than what is boring and less than what's daunting.
Yep.
And if you can keep yourself there and stay in the zone, then you can keep moving forward. And it sounds like what you're describing with Duolingo is that they're trying to get you there into the zone.
Yes. And they've even added some. So say you're kicking ass on some of the early lessons, like you're getting everything right. It's like, hey, it'll even hey, you're kicking ass, you're doing really well. Do you want to just skip to the next levels? Because like everyone has like 5 levels of mastery on it. So it starts out super simple and then it works complete or harder things where you have to like memorize itself, so you can't like tap it and see like the translation. You just have to hear the word or read the and then be able to translate it. And so they basically can have like a to making things more difficult or less difficult based on who you are or wherever you're at within the specific lesson that you're doing. And they're actually podcasts you can listen to. I believe it's Tim Ferriss who interviewed the CEO of the Duolingo, who started the company. And what they want to do, it's not there yet, but they're aiming to do this. Is basically if Duolingo was basically you could open up your Duolingo app and you could tell someone, "Hey, I am some unified scale proficient in whatever language you're learning." And what that would mean to someone if you told them that is like, oh, I'm, language fluent or written fluent, or, you know what I mean? Like you just have a to tell someone just how good you are at a specific language. Because currently it's not like that quantifiable yet. And they're trying to aim for, because part of this is instead of using technology to treat, to auto translate technology, which we should go there to some degree. But I still think there's a huge psychological and intellectual benefit for people to be multilingual. I think there are studies about multilingual people being able to more effectively communicate ideas and things like that. Because personally, so this is kind of a tangent that I wasn't expecting to go to, but in my opinion, language learning helps you understand how other people think, because language is the basis of understanding the framework, the mental model of cultures, because their language rose from those specific cultures. So you can understand deeply how those people formulate their ideas by how they talk, either written or spoken. And so if you just try to like auto translate stuff, like I'm sure, I mean, me and you, Joe, we watch anime, right? And there's a reason why when you watch English dubbed anime doesn't capture the same essence as the original Japanese with English subtitles, because something is lost in translation, even though it's close sometimes, but for the most part, it doesn't capture the essence.
Yeah, people's personalities will shift when they change languages, because they're in some sense embodying the culture. Right? It's a great way to really understand from a procedural level, like what it is that culture is about. Right? It's not looking from the outside in. It's a way of embedding yourself in it, and then sort of emerging out of it with a new understanding. Which is very
one of my for myself is going forward. I can kind of do this already, but there's a lot of actual international films on Netflix now. One of them in German is called Dark, and it's kind of like a psychological thriller that people have said is really good.
On Dark for one moment, I want to go to the bathroom.
All good.
And I also don't want to do it in between thoughts, so that you have a thought to pick up on.
All good. Fair enough.
Need a little water. Need a little water. Okay, Dark.
Dope.
I've heard about
So-
this. Is that on Netflix?
Yeah, it's on Netflix. I think there's like 3 or 4 seasons, but this kind of is a long way of saying, like, this kind of wraps up everything we've been talking about, which is how do you take interests and skills that make you a more three-dimensional person in your life? Because the point of all of this exploration is to say that you're not just one thing. You aren't just whatever your career you think you're going to have in any day, at any given time. And for the vast majority of us, we're not going to just be a doctor, a lawyer, a whatever for 40 years anymore. That's just not the reality. And that was a reality that worked when it did. But the reality now is that you're going to wear a lot of different hats over your lifetime. And you're just going to have different interests over your lifetime. Your role and who you are and who you become, you're just going to change your focus. And that's totally normal. And to say that, well, where's that thing that's going to hit me and I'm just going to feel like I was meant to do this. Well, congratulations. It's the thing that you spend the most time doing or thinking about. And you just got to have to throw a lot of shit at the wall to get there. And what Dark represents, at least in this skill building domain with language learning and changing your thinking about things, is okay, you can learn on an app and you can pretend like you're going through the motions and you're not sure if you're actually learning something. Well, how can you do this without having someone to actually speak that language with? Well, I'm learning German, and Dark is spoken in German as its native, what it was filmed in. And so what you can do is you can turn on Dark, put English subtitles on if you want, but just see how much of that you're actually picking up. Because what I've noticed over time as I've done this, I'm like, wait, I'm translating this in real time. And it's freaking spooky because you're like, it's like something sci-fi where it's like I've installed a decoder in my brain to be able to understand a new language that you're just like, wait a minute.
How did I get here?
Right. And you feel the process of learning a new language, right? It's the same thing to say, like, you're not like learning how to do math or learning how to do physics or pick anything that you learned in school. You don't feel the changes specifically. But what you do notice is that at some point you start from the beginning of class, and by the time the semester ends, you somehow magically acquire some sort of skill in being able to solve problems in the way that the teacher has been able to lay them out to you. But then from there, it doesn't end. Where the magic happens, in my opinion, is how do you take those structured problems and the tool sets you have to solve those structured problems and apply them to the real world. And that is where, in my opinion, the school system has failed, because the school system doesn't help you. It gives you some tool set, but it doesn't tell you how to translate that tool set to the modern world in a real, tangible way that empowers the individual to feel like they can tackle problems they haven't faced in the real world. And that's the whole to give people a breadcrumb trail in which to figure out, like, hey, here's what I'm learning, and wait, I can actually apply this. Because you can go to the gym and you can, do hard things and lift bigger weights, but what does that do? Well, actually, what that's teaching you how to do is be more resilient and be able to say, wait, I can actually incrementally increase the challenge of myself physically, such that when I would go into a mental situation that's more difficult, I realize that I'm more resilient to be able to have those hard discussions with my boss or have a heated discussion with my partner or whatever it happens to be. Because now I realize that I have more mental fortitude than I did before that would have set me off in the past. Things like that. And like I said, the point of being is, like, the reason I'm jumping over examples is because this is all, cross-functional. It's not just, well, because you lift a heavy weight, you're going to be savant or whatever. No, what the point is, if you think about it deeply in your life, you can figure out how to extract little wisdom in which that you can be a more functional human being in your life, however that looks like for you.
That's really cool. And it makes
no supplements needed or money to spend on companies trying to give you a silver bullet.
I hardly know what to say. That was such a nice way to summarize the whole conversation.
I get really heated on this topic, as you can tell. I spent a lot of time with this book. I think it shows. I basically ate bread and slept with it. It came with me everywhere as I dissected every page of this to try and give people the best nuggets of it, which means that I'm probably, outside of the author, I'm probably one of the best people who knows the material in this book.
When did you read that? When were you doing this?
This was released over 2021. It was kind of like the pandemic project I forced myself to do. It probably took me 3 to 6 months to kind of reread the book and then slowly parse everything down to try and basically it took like a 200 and something page book to 40 pages is what I summarized it. But the point of it, so like if you actually go to the page on the website and things like that, the point isn't that I'm like compressing this down to a Spark Notes thing if you're a kid from the 90s. The point is that I am not only providing high points the author provided as my input tastes, but also like, hey, he interviewed this researcher with this specific idea who happened to also write a book on that idea. And if you really like that idea, maybe you want to go read that book instead. Or, hey, this guy who talked about this idea, he's an author, but he also did a TED Talk that's only 20 minutes long. And maybe all you need is that TED Talk to gain something of this. And so instead of being locked by the domain of printed word or audiobook, now we can leverage the power of the internet to be able to say, wait, all of this is connected and we can connect the tissue, right? We can add connective tissue like brain using text documents to allow people to go and double click as their curiosity, tongue in cheek intended there, wants them to go, right? Like the point is, I'm not trying to say this is how you do it. The point being is this is where it starts. This is how you figure out what you're interested in. You just keep clicking on the things that you're interested in until all of a sudden you're like, wait, how did I get here?
This is okay. So for those that don't know, this is the blueprint that you created.
Yes.
Is available on feedingcuriosity.com, and it behaves like a network, a series of nodes of information, hyperlinks that you can dive deeper into. That springs from this book.
Yep.
And the book is Range by
David Epstein.
David Epstein.
So we basically covered like 2.5 chapters. So there's 12. Huh?
How much? You went through every chapter?
No, we only did 2 of them.
You just distilled how much? The whole book, right?
I did the whole book chapter by chapter. So you can find starting from chapter 1 to chapter 12. You can find all of it. It was a lot of work.
It sounds like it, yeah.
It's basically, imagine a book report, but on steroids, but also functional.
You did this for other books.
The plan, other books, having a day job, it's hard to parse books, but having these conversations is kicking my ass to do it. So I'm actually in process of starting the second book right now, which spoiler note, I interjected into this conversation, which is the talent code. I'm already like 2 chapters into that one. So that one's going to be the idea. So I have I'm giving insider baseball, but if you're this or listening to this on the podcast, you care enough to want to understand some of this stuff. And basically I have a trifecta of ideas that I'm working on to kind of, it'll be like one mega blueprint when I'm done. It's like a cohesive triangle, so to speak, where you had range, which is kind of like skill building in the world. Like, why do we need to be broadly skilled, right? Try to be as broad as we possibly can to be able to pick and choose and have the basically largest toolbox available to us to solve as many complicated problems as. The next one, which is the talent code, is going to be a tackling. Okay, so if we need to be broad and we need to be skilled, well, how does that fucking work? So that's what talent code is going to be. And then the third one is going to be, how do we scale that? Or what is the scaling of that? And at scale, I guess, is another way to do it if we were using jargonese
Are you gonna do the culture code?
That's what I was thinking. That's what I was thinking. And then I actually I have more books that I have in mind to try and pull different ideas from. That we'll see when we get there. What I really need to do is just kind of have like a writing day that I need to just do this. But I'm sure you get this, Joe. But if you've ever tried to write things, you just fucking hate every second it is that you're writing something until you hit a roll, hit a groove.
Means that wraps us up.
Yeah. Alcohol, the ultimate lubricant.
Yeah,
it helps that I'm. It helps that I'm doing like the other part of this, and I think we could actually do. I keep giving myself ideas on podcasts to do at this point because Jesus fucking Christ. But I wish I had one of my books on me that I've basically flagged out. But I have an entire process now that I do to make this easier on myself going forward, which I've been doing for a while. I just realized that I can apply this to make blueprints and break things down for people. But basically, I have a highlighter with me at all times. So I'm highlighting quotes and chapters and people for the podcasts or for the things I'll write so that I can easily them. This is a double-edged sword because the idea is that I'd love to interview any of these scientists mentioned in books because these guys don't really get much screen time for like airing out their ideas other than when art or authors are trying to package it into a book idea they have, right? So the point is that going down the line, we can basically influence science and science discovery such that we can say, hey, look, we have people that are interested in your specific area of research. And we can just keep going down these people and leverage their, like guys, right? They're the guys at the bottom of the ocean digging for us. And we need to pull them to the surface for an hour to be able to, well, what have you found? What is the gem that you can tell us? And then you could let them go back down to the deep ocean so that we can continue, see what we can pull from what they're learning.
That's very cool.
It's like TED Talks, but more open and just for the curiosity to push people forward, whatever that looks like, right? Because it's not about it's about finding what's functional.
This reminds me of, in it's gonna be a weird leap, but Mario Kart, right? When you're driving every so often on the road, there are these things that just are launch pads that just bang and shoot you forward way faster.
Yeah.
Right? It's like I'm on the avenue to some kind of learning. This is a way of launching myself in that general direction.
Right.
How this strikes me is that it isn't a replacement. It isn't any of these things. It's that it's a way of just like it's a portal. Bang, shooting forward. Stargate.
It's an accelerator. Because the point is, right, like just because someone is influential researcher or scientist or CEO or whatever you name it, right? Whatever prestigious role that they figured out something. The point being is that there's a little nugget in what they're specialized in that we can wrap into our lives such that we don't have to go and reinvent the wheel to have a gain of function. I shouldn't say gain of function, but there's some negative connotations there with the pandemic, but regardless, but like there's like a leading, instead of just existing at your normal rate, because, if you're just you and you're just absorbing information in a book or whatever, it's hard to kind of direct focus and be like, well, what should I be focusing on? Instead, what you can do is you can turn to the people that you feel, some sort of ideological or kinship toward in this idea of living better. And by doing so, you can leverage their 20 years of research and catapult yourself, because then what'll happen is that person might get a hold of that 20-something-year-old, right? Say you're this researcher who's done, skill building research for 20 years, and this person happens to stumble across your ideas and starts applying them. How far would you be had they been your age, right? Like, you know what I mean? Like, it's like, well, I wish I would have been your idea. Like, how many times have you ever heard that?
Very funny, because I was just talking about this in a meeting today with my master's program people. and we talked about statistics and how I'm very happy that SPSS and R and all these stats platforms exist. And maybe it's good for me to learn. It is good for me to learn all the formulas and what exactly these things are doing and understand that at a conceptual level. But I am fucking thrilled that I don't have to memorize all the formulas and know the math to such a degree that I could just do it by hand. It's like I am, because at a certain point, I would just be a statistician. And
Right.
the fact that somebody came before me is such a benefit because it increases the efficiency of the entire research endeavor by providing that to a
Yeah.
generation, right? That's cool. So I have
Yeah.
okay. So I have a question for you. So probably multiple questions. You're talking about range. This is a book that struck you as interesting. Why do you think it struck you as interesting? And has it? Can you provide something that's kind of concrete or demonstrable as to why this is, if this has benefited you in some particular way?
So the first part of that question is I've always felt as someone like a generalist. I never wanted to be one category in any sense. Even I've always kind of had this feeling since I was really little. I don't really know why, but I just always didn't want to just pick one thing because I didn't want to close doors in a weird sense.
Yeah.
And actually, part of the reason I chose engineering in the way that I did was that I had a whole bunch of ideas that thought I could be good at, like scientist broadly. Um, but out of all of them that I could have chose, like I think I thought like archaeologists. I didn't really think physics was one for me because I just didn't have like the drive to do high level math. I just wasn't enamored like that. I've always been really drawn to functional, like how do you take science and then take science that makes something real and practical in life. And so something like range for me speaks to me because it kind of touches at all of the aspects of like how do you build a framework to live better. And so I kind of stumbled on this myself because of my interests in exercise science and physiology, nutrition, the longevity science and things like that. I'd already kind of stumbled on this unique secret sauce that I developed on my own because no one would have ever explained it to me because I had always thought that working out was a meathead thing early on. It was like just pick up a big weight and put it down and well, I guess you're stronger, kid. And yeah, and for reference for people who don't know, I'm like even in high school I was like 5'2" freshman year, 110 pounds. And here I am at 29, I'm 5'6", 160 pounds. So, like, there's no hope for me to ever be a star athlete with that type of body. And so, what I did is took an engineering's approach to weightlifting. I was like, well, I like robotics, and guess what? My body is a really thick, close proximate to biomechanics and robots. So I'm gonna start treating myself like a science experiment. I'm gonna learn how to do different lifts and think about it in a way where it's like, okay, if I'm gonna do a bicep curl, what's going on here as like a lever, right? Because you can look at there's a fulcrum and you can start doing that. But then the best part is that over time, if you track yourself well enough, like you don't even have to write this in a book, but you can have a good idea. You start at 10 pounds. 2 weeks later, you're at 15 pounds, right? And like you can like natural science, like treating your body like it's a lab, and you can do all this stuff and you get real tangible feedback like we started this thing with, and you can start selecting for variables. And then as you get better and better at understanding your body, you can start realizing that you can track yourself in other ways such that you're can be, instead of just throwing things at the wall and being like, well, I'm studying, I'm doing my homework, I'm figuring it out. Like you can actually create frameworks in which that are tailored to your specific way that works for you. And it doesn't mean it has to work for everyone else, because it doesn't matter. Because if the outcome means you're better, then you're winning. Like, you don't have to measure your success to other people, because you, like, the I think is really important here is like, it's easy to look at someone who's done a thing for a very long time and be like, well, I'll never be like that jacked guy in the corner who's 280 squatting 3-4 plates. But the point being is, early on, I checked my ego at the door and said, that guy's day one was 5+ years ago. And that's the reality of a lot of these things. Like, you can look at a guy who's really well built and a bodybuilder and say, well, his day one was 5 years ago or whatever. The reality is that a lot of these scientists, right, exactly. Like, the reality being is that a lot of these scientists at the cutting edge or whatever domain, their day one was 10 years ago or more. And so the point is that if you're really that interested and really that bought in, you have to just today and just keep going, because it's over the long term that you'll realize just how far you can come. You gotta throw yourself and say, well, this is what I'm doing. And even if it sucks, even if you hate it, because I mean, if you're growing at all, of course you're going to hate the thing you did before, even a year ago. I mean, there's podcasts I listen to today that I still hate or don't enjoy as much as I did before.
This is such a I love this, because there's a certain, you hear people that are like, no regrets. If you say no regrets, you haven't grown up. Because if you're not embarrassed in the past, that's because you haven't matured enough to realize that thing is embarrassing.
Right.
You should be embarrassed. Half of growing up is realizing you're an idiot and making correct. That's growing up. Stop sucking.
Right.
So this idea that, like, you can live a life free of regrets. Why would you want to?
Yeah.
Why would you want to?
I think too, for me, it's like, there's all this like growth hack, pseudo entrepreneurial bullshit that goes around now, and I kind of hate the idea of hacks. Like this one hack will change your life. I think there's no substitute for doing work. Like, you have, like, if you want to get stronger and you want to like run a mile faster, well, guess what? You're gonna have to start running. I'm sorry, there's no secret to do that unless you want to do roids, but I'm sorry, that's not a good idea. If you really care about your longevity or your overall quality of health, doing roids to shortcut your way to doing anything, and you could substitute roids for whatever you want, whatever domain, that would be cheating. Because it's like, for me, it's like, okay, if you want to get better at something, try to make tomorrow, or today rather, a win. And if you do just 1% of what you hope to do, like be 1% better today, you do that every day, right? Like, what happens in a year? Because I swear to God, you'll be you'll be better than you were if you did nothing. Promise. Right? Like, if you write one for writers out there, it's like some of the pithy things. It's like, write one shitty page a day. Just do one shitty page. It could be double spaced if you need it to be double. You know, if you don't think you can write one single page word, fine. Right? Change the font size to whatever you think is necessary, but write one shitty page. And you do that every day for a year. What happens? Promise you might have a book by the end of that year. It might be a shitty book, but it's a start.
Doesn't matter, right? It doesn't matter if it's shitty.
But you did something you wouldn't have done otherwise. The same thing is true for starting a new diet.
This is something that I learned so sincerely, so clearly from weightlifting. You're talking about being a generalist, and that you can take things that seem just purely physical, and that they apply, in fact, to intellectual endeavors. I mean, a bunch of the Stoics were like wrestlers and athletes, right? And that the metaphors they use reflect that. But like, I learned a ton from weightlifting. I learned the idea of the zone of proximal development from weightlifting, because the place where you're making growth isn't in the 3-4 sets where you're doing okay, or reps where you're doing okay. It's in those next two where you're struggling and you are barely finishing it, where you're barely making it over the line, right? That's the place where you do it. And it isn't either the place where you go up and then you immediately fail, right? It's right there, right in the misery. And if you
Yeah.
can understand the suffering, not pain, right, isn't injurious, right? Or injurious, is that a word? This kind of injury invoking pain, right, where you have an injury. That's not it. It's that I'm nailing it. I'm the right form. I have the right everything, and I
Yeah.
am feeling it exactly where I'm meant to feel it. And this is very uncomfortable. And you continue. And so one of the coolest things that I noticed, probably I don't know when this happened, but as I've gotten older, is that the there's you can focus on the pain. That if you reject it, if you reject the pain, you don't look at it, right? And you should like dissociate, you space out, and you're just trying to like and try to get through the misery. That it doesn't, you can't, it doesn't go as far.
Yeah.
It will work as well. And then what I found is that the pain itself will even dissipate if I let it tell me what it wants to tell me. That I
Yeah.
just accept the pain. Yes, I see that you're in pain. I would I would like to continue. We are going to keep moving. There's 3 more left.
Yeah.
Let's just do this. And that's been huge. It's so maybe the solution to stagnation, to this kind of the way to grow best is to be conscious. Right?
So
That
there's
might be the
two ideas here, and they actually triggered both. They're both from books, but the zone of proximal development sounds like to me is the idea of flow, right? It's like where you're kind of just in the pocket, right, where time seems to go away, and you're just kind of woo. You're just in it, right? And like as soon as you recognize that you're in flow, then it's over, right? But that's kind of like with that flow feeling. And there's a book on this subject called Stealing Fire. Highly, highly recommend it. So that'll probably, now that I'm thinking about it, that might be the other, because I remembered it as you were talking. um, but that one is really, really beneficial if you're really trying to fire on all cylinders, combining all these ideas with between skill building and being broad and just, you know, as a Jocko would say, getting after it in life. I think that's really important. And then the other book that I was thinking of that's more recent for me, which is The Comfort Crisis. And the idea of, for me, like the highest level I can give you without going into detail, because I'll tangent forever on that one too, is being comfortable with uncomfortable, right? Like, and this comes from another idea within the ultra running community. I had him on the podcast before. His name is Alec Eichert. And what he said, and this is very common within the ultra community. So ultra is for people who run over a marathon's distance in a single period. So it could be 24 hours, it could be less, but it's basically anything over marathon distance. You run that as fast as you can. They're insane people. I respect the hell out of them though, and it just shows the tenacity and the levels of a human endurance the human body can take, but also the mind. And what he says is that the point of it is you get comfortable in the pain cave. You the pain cave and you just start, you make murals on the wall while you're in your pain cave, and you just keep running, and you just keep putting one foot in front of the other, and you're just in your pain cave, and you just go. And it sounds insane unless you've been there. Like, try running a half marathon and you'll find real quickly that your legs hurt, your abs are on fire, your calves are on fire, And yeah, you're just going to hate a lot of it, and you're just going to have to deal with it, however however that looks like for you. And for a lot of people, I'm not saying you should, if you've never run before, you shouldn't do that, because you're going to break, because your mind is not ready for it. But what you can do is you slowly increment your way up to being able to do something like that. And you basically build, to use an engineering term, your pain cave is a battery. And you slowly improve the capacity of your battery as you get more and more trained mentally and physically to take on that level of strain. And again, that applies to any and all domains. The more you deal with the uncomfortable things you don't know how to do, the more proficient you get at doing those things.
Yeah. Makes sense to me.
Yeah, I knew it would make sense to you. It just, there's all these analogies that pop into my head as you're talking, and I'm like, wait, I've seen this in a different way before. See, I'm doing the lateral thinking in real time. Well, we're an hour and almost 40 minutes already. We went over our hour.
Yes, we did.
we hit a groove and kept going. I would love to keep going, but I have to get ready for bed because I'm on Michigan time right now.
Yep, you got a whole conference.
Yes, I gotta be on for another full day. So, yeah. Either way, this was way more energizing, though, in any sense.
Good.
All right, everybody. We will catch you all in the next one.